All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Smith. I'm the planning section supervisor over in the District 7 office in Lexington. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for joining us with this presentation for Kentucky 52 corridor study. This is a study that was done in the Boyle and Garrett County area, connecting Danville to Lancaster. It's beginning at US 150 in Danville and continuing out to western Lancaster. I might be staring at my phone just a little bit here. I put together some notes. I am a millennial after all, so I do my life's on my phone here. But I actually took these notes last night after having a few drinks, so I'm hoping that everything on here makes sense. But I'm just kidding. I didn't. I wrote it this morning actually. All right. So yeah, this section of Kentucky 52 has been cited with so many safety concerns, and much of it is really out of the roadway geometry and the traffic. It is one of the connections that brings Danville over to I-75 over to the east. This project has been in conversation for several years, actually. I believe it first started over in 2004. At least that's when it was entered in the PIF database, I think is what it was called at the time. And but the desire was to have a more robust roadway that provides that east-west connectivity between Danville and I-75. The section, as you probably already know, the section from Lancaster all the way out to the county line to Madison County, has recently been completed for a few years now. And we're also now just constructing the last section from the Madison County line out to I-75. But the unfortunate thing is this project's been talked about for so long, and it never really got legs. It really never moved forward. And so we thought that this was something that we probably need to look at a little more closely to evaluate, to really narrow down the scope of what improvements need to be done there. Of course, this project has had the support from the county judges. It was in SHIP 2020. It was sponsored. It was pushed for. It was pushed again in SHIP 2022. And what we did differently in the more recent shift processes is that we took an entire corridor that's cost about over $40 million to do, and then broke it out into 3 sections. Not really thinking much about how these sections should be broken up. So, but yeah, there really wasn't much movement on this, and so we thought that it was appropriate to go ahead and do some analysis to narrow down the scope of this project. But as luck would have it, Steve DeWitt, he contacted me, and we actually had some STP MAP 21 funds that were available that we needed to obligate. So that really helped us move this study forward and through the planning statewide contract. So. But in sticking to the theme of this conference, I believe it's called Innovation in Transportation. Some of the what I felt like was really unique about this study is that we had a coordination and collaboration with our friends over at the Highway Safety Improvement Program. I've only been in planning for only 3 years, so at least it was unique for me, implementing some of the HSIP concepts, sharing ideas, and more or less coming up with improvement concepts that don't necessarily overlap too much with each other from what HSIP was doing versus some of the more higher end capital improvement projects that we would be presenting here in this presentation. Of course, there were also some new technologies, which Theresa is going to be talking about, new technologies on identifying some key issues along this corridor. And it's one of those things where I feel like there's a ton of data that we are processing. I feel like in planning, we've always been data-based, but I feel like that we are getting more and more into large data. You could think of the streetlight program that we just have a subscription for, and eventually I'll figure out how to use that software. But we're dealing with more and more big data lately. So I kind of feel like that this is really the way of the future, you know, how we'd be processing things. And it was a pretty good project that we would like to share with you all. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Rebecca Thompson out of QK4, and she will kind of get us introduced to the whole scope of the planning study.
All right, so like Casey said, we were looking at this particular corridor study kind of from two diverse perspectives. One side coming at it from the traditional planning study side of things, using our planning hats, and then on the other side, really taking a more hands-on HSIP, data-driven, quick turnaround kind of approach. Okay, so just to kind of hit the corridor highlights, it was a rural minor arterial, like Casey mentioned, between Danville over to Lancaster. It's got narrow lanes, tiny shoulders, 45, 55 mile an hour speed limit, about 4,000 ABT. You can see some pictures here of the corridor itself, kind of getting a feel for the typical section, for the steep side slopes, some of the pavement edge drop-off concerns. And it's one of those rural roller coasters where sometimes you can see and sometimes you can listen. There were 245 crashes over a 5-year analysis period, including 3 fatalities. You can see called out with the call-out boxes. There were about 60% of those that were single vehicle collisions, and I think 60% as well were RD crashes, roadway departure, which tend to be more severe. So it was definitely a worthwhile corridor to take a look at and try and get that HSIP perspective blended in. And Theresa is going to kind of talk about how we approach the data.
Okay. All right, so let's take a closer look at our corridor. The way we approach this from an HSIP perspective, with our HSIP hat, we used a new, well, what we've been told is a new software for the HSIP process, which is called TopoDot. It's a point cloud processing software. So we drove the corridor with mobile LiDAR, and then this software allowed us to extract features such as edge of pavement, center line, and use that information to get more detailed information. So some of the benefits was, you know, we could measure a lot of this stuff from the safety of a desk chair. We didn't have to be out there on this corridor with, as you can see, some very high truck traffic and wide loads, measuring things. It was a lot safer to do it from our desk. We could get about a bit more data, like Casey said, with the data issue, a larger quantity of data, more accurate data. Point clouds are very accurate. Some of the drawbacks, though, is I didn't get much exercise. Did you see? I did a lot of the analysis for my desk chair, which, like I said, is great. It's safe, but I didn't burn as many calories. Some of the other drawbacks is, you know, a lot of network processing was required for this. So when you're working on a shared drive with big data, that can be a slow process. But overall, we thought it was a great tool for analyzing this corridor's physical features. So a little bit more about how the program works. Like I said, first step is extraction of features. You know, get your edge lines, get your center lines, get your dish flow lines, guardrail, kind of almost put them in like you would get in a traditional survey. But then the real value comes in step 2, the analysis, and that's where the program really helped us. It had certain tools that could give you curve advisory speeds. You know, you could measure the lane and shoulder widths at any increment you wanted. You could do it every 5 feet if you wanted. You're definitely not going to be able to do that out in the field. You can get pavement widths and drop-offs. You can get a slope because you have an elevation with your lines. So now you can get a slope between those 2 lines. And you, like I said, you can get that on any increment you want. You could easily extract locations of poles, utility poles, and then sort them quickly by distance from roadway. So you can narrow in on which poles are, you know, closest and within your clear zone. Some other cool tools was pavement condition. It actually had a tool to do PCI index reports on pavement. Other things, tree trimming, and we could even create a rudimentary surface for analysis and design later on. So just to give you an example of what some of these things look like, that here I've got curve advisory speeds where, you know, by station, it told you what the computed speed was. Now this is kind of a black box for us. So we kind of use this more as like a tool to narrow in or narrow down what curves we needed to take a closer look at. Was really what it's helpful for. The graph on the bottom, which you probably can't see very well in the back of the room, but it is pavement width by station. And so this is a lot of points. Like I said, it's a lot of data, but what you can see from this is generally between 22 and 24 feet is what we have for pavement width. Of course, there's outliers. There's places where we're narrower, there's places where we're wider, but in general, we can say with confidence that we're between 22 and 24 feet, which is sometimes hard to do on these HSIP projects where it's like, well, how wide is it? Well, you know, it varies, but this graph really gave us a good representation of the corridor as a whole. Another example, like I said before, side slopes. We could sort where do we have those steep drop-offs? Where do we need to maybe look at doing some roadside regrading? Another extraction we could do was pavement edge drop-offs, you know, where you get that lip where if your wheel hits it and you try and auto-correct, you can lose control quite easily. Guardrail. So once we extracted the guardrail, we were able to tell the height of the guardrail, the offset of the guardrail from the edge of the pavement. That was useful. Utility poles. We were able to place a cell where all the poles were and quickly sort them, like I said, by station and offset from your center line. So you can quickly see which ones are closest. Signs, you can get those through sign inventory off LiDAR and through Topo.dot. This is the other one, pavement condition. Another one that we kind of use is just kind of an indicator of where we needed to start looking for rutting and other pavement failures. And last or second to last, the tree trimming. So we could kind of designate an envelope and run it through the corridor, and it would turn all the points in the LiDAR red, and then also delineate them in plan. So you knew exactly where your limits of tree trimming would need to be for your specified envelope. And then probably my favorite tool was the super elevation. You could get, like I said, the cross slopes at any increment you wanted to, and then you could plot those cross slopes, and you could actually see the curve of the super elevation and how it was behaving versus what it should do if you were doing perfect, you know, fresh from design. And this really helped us find areas where we had really bad cross slope. This one's not bad, actually. This is a pretty good example of one, but I should have included one that had, you know, negative cross slope on a curve. So that was kind of my nerdy engineer tool that I like to use a lot. But so, like I said, that's a lot of data, and I'll let Rebecca talk more about the analyzation.
So definitely coming at it from the traditional planning experience, right? Where we're blending in HIS data that says you have 11-foot lanes and 1-foot paved shoulders. Now we suddenly have so much more data to work with the Topo.dot, with the LiDAR information that Theresa was talking about. And not only do we have more data, we have more accurate data. Just one quick example, HIS says you have 11-foot lanes. After we ran the extractor Topo.dot tool, you can see we got about 6% of the corridor maybe that has 11-foot lanes. We're a lot closer to just over 10. And then multiply that by every single feature that Theresa just talked about, right? So we had a ton more to look at. Just taking, for example, the curve data, she mentioned that we were able to get a lot more information about individual curves that you can see summarized in the table at the bottom of the screen. We could calculate exposure, knowing that there was 52% of the corridor landed inside a designated curve, whereas we saw 60% of the crashes in those segments, which really told us, you know, you should probably focus in on that. And we were able to slice it down and look at curves by radius and where those trends are popping up. That table at the bottom kind of shows you that we saw the highest concentration of crashes in curves for those tighter radius curves, less than 600 feet. We were also able to kind of zoom in and say that curve crashes on wet pavement were overrepresented, and really focus in on which countermeasures are most effective for the situations that we're seeing overrepresented. And then multiply that by looking at pavement widths, by looking at those side slopes, by looking at the pavement condition that she was talking about, really digging in and getting to that data-driven elements of the analysis. One of the other key things that kind of the planning process dragged over for the HSIP team to look at was really having those conversations with local officials on the ground. We've obviously got the data to know where the substandard curves are, to know where the grades don't give you adequate sight distance, to know where the statistical analysis say we've got a high critical rate factor or poor level of service of safety, and can overlay those and kind of get some target areas that we want to look at from a planning perspective. But then because it was a planning project, we were also able to reach out and engage with those local decision makers, with the mayor, with the maintenance guys, with the public through a community survey to really understand, for the people driving the route, for the people that pulling the wrecks out of the ditch lines, what they're seeing, where the accidents, where the crashes are happening, as well as where the near misses are happening, to really get that on the ground feel for what's going on. Definitely the data was pointing us more to focus in on the Garrett County side of the route because it just had so many substandard curves and crashes. But if you'll notice the pink dots on the map, a lot more of our comments came from the Boyle County section, which we would not have necessarily zeroed in on just looking at the crash data. So kind of the third approach is that since we work on methods from two different directions, two different approaches, we were really able to look at a wider selection of improvements than what would be considered in just an HSIP study or just a planning study, so that nobody gets left behind or forgotten, right? And Theresa's going to talk about that.
So first, to talk about some of the things that we would consider with an HSIP project to improve safety on this corridor. Like Rebecca said, we have a bunch of data. We had a bunch of ways to slice and dice it and look at it. But at the end of the day, there's always a budget, right? So we have different concepts to consider. They all have a cost associated with them. And then there's also a return investment associated with them. And that's where I think we had a lot of collaboration with our planning folks, and they really helped us with that as well. But just ultimately, you also have to mix in a little bit of engineering judgment. And eventually, we arrived at the HSIP countermeasures that we would be advancing. Some of them were corridor wide, where we just saw that, you know, there's just so many steep drop-offs on this corridor that we should do roadside regrading everywhere. Guardrail, same thing. Permanent paint, 6-inch paint and striping. I mean, that's just easy. ROI on that so high, we got to do that everywhere. However, there were some other improvements that were maybe didn't make sense to do everywhere, and we really needed to focus in on those areas that we identified through our earlier analysis, that we would get the most bang for our buck if we did it in just those targeted areas. One of those in particular are the pavement widening. We got a lot of benefit out of rumble strips. However, we couldn't put rumble strips down unless we had enough pavement width. So, okay, well, we can't afford to widen the entire corridor. So let's just do it in the area that has, and that Rebecca alluded to earlier, in Garrett County, that has a lot of relief with the terrain and very bad sight distance. And, you know, that's where we should really focus our efforts, or, you know, target our funds for that. So that's kind of how we went about it on the HSIP side.
So then on the planning side, we kind of picked up where HSIP ran out of money, right? And we can look at the big picture stuff, actual realigning the roadway, never mind the giant gas pipelines that are going to cost $1 bazillion. We can look at full scale corridor widening, getting it out to that 25, 26 feet where you can actually put the edge line and center line rumble strips on it, as well as individual intersection improvements. You can see labeled on the map there, B through G. We ended up picking up one of the HSIP options there. Spot H is a set of S curves there near Pope Road, where we heard from the local officials, you know, we get a lot of people running off the road here. This is the tree they always hit. This is the guy, he knows what to do. It's cool. But because we had a little bit more budget to work with, we were able to kind of pick up those that fell through the cracks to make sure that those good, valuable improvements are still picked up on the planning side. So this map kind of highlights how those two overlap, with the stars being the planning intersection improvements, and then the colors that are really hard to see at this scale. I apologize for this beautiful sunny room, covering some of the HSIP stuff. So on the HSIP side alone, we were at about $2.1 million. If you fold in the short-term planning improvements on top of that, we were right at 2.7. And then if you fold in the long-term, eventual, maybe someday stuff, adds up really quickly to somewhere over 30 million.
All right, so some lessons learned is HSIP puts the data in the data-driven process. Like I said, we have so much data and you can get lost in it pretty quickly. But like I said, at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. Funds are limited, and really need to narrow in on what your end goal and focus is, and that was improving safety. And Rebecca.
So one of our other lessons learned was the benefit of actually talking to a larger group of stakeholders than you would engage with on a traditional data-driven HSIP project. Sometimes you get really good insights, and sometimes you get really good stories, but it was still a valuable exercise to work through. And Casey's going to wrap us up.
So, I think what really made this this study successful was the close cooperation, communication, collaboration with our friends over at the with the HSIP program. It did expose us to different perspectives, short-term perspectives as well as perspectives that we have and more of a long-term type scenario. So. But yeah, the approaches that were set forth and being able to minimize the overlap, between HSIP and planning I felt was pretty successful. Now, every once in a while I had to wait on the HSIP folks, for information, but you saw all the data that they had to deal with, so it takes some time. But no, I thought it actually worked very well, and I really feel like that I feel like that, in District 7, we may actually be seeing more of this later in the future, this coordination with HSIP and planning. First off, well, HSIP is actually housed in planning in the district, at least in my district office. So I don't know how it is in other district offices, but but it is housed with us. And some may be asking, this kind of looks like an HSIP project. Why bother, doing this? The planning study, not the presentation. But why would we do that? And but really, it's just to consider. Just consider this. This planning study was completed this March. I think it's when we finalized it and published it. And since then, our CDE actually received a phone call from Judge Hunt saying that there was a serious collision at that S-curve that Rebecca was talking about off of Pope Road. And, while we do have an HSIP project through there, at least we also have a planning study that has already been published, where we kind of gives us a little bit more of a head start in the preliminary design phase. The project happened to be in the highway plan. It's a section of Kentucky 52 between Pope Road and Kentucky 590. And although it's not really focusing on each individual concept that came out of the planning study, we were able to kind of pick and choose, which items really fit within the area of this project. Some of the things that we'll be considering is a portion of concept A, which was the overall widening of the corridor. There's also concept H, which was the curves, as well as like improvements that were identified for Pope Road and Kentucky 590. So it does give us a little more insight, as well as the local input from local officials and the public as we move forward into preliminary design. Now, of course, the public involvement is still going to continue in preliminary design, but at least it gives us a little more of a head start in developing our improvement concepts in preliminary design. Another example I'm just thinking of right now, and this is also a safety project, and is Kentucky 151 over in Anderson County. That was a planning study that had a lot of smaller safety improvement countermeasures. Right now, our HSIP group is actually taking care of that project as well. So we already have a couple examples in the past couple of years that we have been doing this, and so I think it's a pretty good setup, and it's been a pleasure working with Rebecca and Theresa on this study. So since Rebecca and Theresa have been talking most of this time throughout this presentation, I guess I'll just stay up here and answer any questions that you may have. And if anyone online would like to send in the chat, I'll do my best to answer or field any questions that you all may have. So, yeah, Chris?
Two-part question. Well, how much light on homes and light on corridor?
So
All right, the question was, how much did the LiDAR cost? And did we do the whole corridor? We did do the whole corridor. And Tom, how much did it cost?
And bring them up down. Got a bargain. Excellent.
Apparently we got a bargain on it and we don't let it fit what we paid for.
Associated question. Do you have any idea of how many terabytes per mile of data? Of how, you know, just how large that file, that data,
Right.
batch is in size?
The question was, how large was the data? How many terabytes? I know that we have a separate network just for point clouds. And do you know how many terabytes that is? I don't know. Yeah, we were able to work with it. It worked best actually to download it to I actually had it on a hard drive that I plugged into my computer. That actually worked out the best. So, you know, you want to limit the amount of people working on it to maybe one or two. And, you know, that way, and it just helps a little bit. But
How big was the hard drive?
oh, it wasn't bad. It was my little pink one from college. It was nothing special. It's the one thing I'll grab in my house, you know, goes up in flames. The back.
So what's kind of the take on value like this?
The question was the value. What is the value of using this software? Would we use it again? Is that correct? Does that summarize your question? Okay. There's definitely a learning curve, and I feel like we have overcome the learning curve. So I would like to use it again if the opportunity presented itself. Like I said, you can't really put a value on safety of being out there measuring these things, especially these corridors that are known for their, you know, unsafe conditions. So, but again, I guess it depends if we get that deal on the LiDAR again.
Yeah, I think a fair question, you know, or a fair answer to that question is, yeah, it would have to be on a case by case, you know, scenario. I mean, planning studies could range from, you know, small urban area studies, large corridors, and so forth. This one had a really strong, you know, safety aspect to it, and you know, the geometry was just part of it. Pavement condition was another. You know, this is Kentucky 52 is just one of those roadways that might have been a cow path and it got, you know, paved over, you know. So yeah, I think that it's really more going to be on a case by case scenario in the scale of the study that, you know, that we're working on. Obviously, we're not going to be, you know, doing LiDAR information on a, well, see, this was like a 9-mile corridor, I believe, like 9.25 miles. You know, we want to be doing it on like a huge, you know, connector study, so, you know, so to speak, you know, I think it really would be on a case by case scenario. And also what we're also expecting out of the study, I think, would also be a consideration of whether to use good solid dense LiDAR to help us out with the planning study.
I was just going to add that if it's the kind of study that's likely to evolve into future stages where you're doing some of that more detailed design work that's going to require a survey anyway, then maybe it makes sense to try and pull in a little more of that data-driven base foundation layer up front, but definitely not a traditional planning study because it is rather hefty price tag.
I guess before you started this study, your understanding of LiDAR, now using LiDAR with this study, with LiDAR being used in autonomous vehicles, where does this push you in your thought of that safety aspect of autonomous vehicles?
I want to read the front of the line, figure that out. That sounds awesome.
Right, it's just,
that's good.
like just the amount of data that you've gotten from just using that.
Yeah, it's like I was saying earlier, I mean, planning, I feel like that we're getting more and more into large data. So yeah, I really do feel like with the technology that's available, you know, I'm sure as the prices are continuing to decline. Yeah, I really do feel like that's something that we would be doing in the next few decades, you know, doing more and more
But
of this.
I guess my question would be like, would that be something that you would put to the forefront of like supporting and pushing autonomous vehicles in like the city of Kentucky based on the safety implication of the amount of information that you get from LiDAR?
That feels like a bigger, higher level policy decision.
No, I
We
get
can-
that, but I'm just saying like in general, like looking at all this data and
Yeah.
how like you fine tune things, that would be something you'd be like, wow, this, you know, the amount of information, you know, really supports that, like your 6-inch lines, like we all know rumble strips, 6-inch lines and all this stuff that you said is a benefit, but like you got this software and device in a vehicle to be able to say, this is there, this is not there, this is, you know, the payments and condition to where bring that all together to where as a motorist, we're trying to take all that in.
Yeah.
So you have a device that you're sitting in that might not be completely autonomous, level 5, that's telling you what to do. So that was just giving just, you know, like you said, yay, I totally support it. That's what
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry for that.
it's cool. Don't leave that one corner that it's applied to though, because then
Yeah, no, I agree.
the internet's still a little patchy in some places around here.
All right, I'm just gonna look at my phone real quick. It doesn't look like we have any chats or questions.
No,
on the
I didn't
chat
see
bar,
any.
So, okay, yeah, thank you.
So